Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. We're excited to host this panel event on the future of education and how to train the students of today to become the leaders of tomorrow. This event will bring together a diverse panel of experts in front of me here and current students of the MSc Global Sustainability Solutions program to discuss how education must evolve to prepare the next generation of leaders and face the climate crisis. Today's speakers include Sarah Mukherjee, MBE, who is a former BBC Environment correspondent, a non-executive director on the board of the Environment Agency and CEO of IEMA. We've got James Dyke on the end, an academic, author, and associate professor in Earth System Science and assistant director of the Global Systems Institute at the University of Exeter. We have in the middle, chairing this session today, Laurie Laybourn, an award-winning researcher and strategist and author of A Planet on Fire, a manifesto for the age of environmental breakdown. We're also hosting some of our students from the program, and these include Amy Shaw. Amy has 10 years consulting experience, the majority of which has been focused on advising organizations on purpose-led public relations strategies. We have Alec Lee, who has an undergraduate in philosophy and politics and has worked with That Place Food Bank and the Climate Emergency Center in Totnes. We also have Sejal Agarwal. Sejal has almost 6 years of experience in rural sales and marketing, product management and strategy, and social projects management. And finally, we have Belinda Martin. Belinda is an active champion for sustainability and community transformation, working on the successful implementation of the donut model for the greater Exeter area. This panel will last roughly 30 minutes to 40 minutes with 30 to 20 minutes of Q&A. Thank you again for coming. And I hand this microphone now over to Laurie.
Should I take this one? Oh yeah, got it. Hello, everyone, as well as our fans who are tuning in from around the world. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right.
Hello, fans.
Welcome to this discussion, as we heard, on how we can train future leaders. I want to lay down some caveats first, though. We must remember that it is current leaders who are failing us, and the responsibility does not fall in that failure onto younger generations. I think the kind of discussion we'll have here today is how we can think of generations who are coming up, of how we train those future leaders in a way that can mean that they can be as impactful as possible on shifting things now, as well as being able to sustain that into an uncertain and dangerous future as well. So I want to lay that one down as a first. A second thing I'd like to say is that as we go through some initial reflections from the panel, it would be particularly interesting to get all of your thoughts from your lived experience of how you have experienced education, how you feel that has made you more or less prepared or able to handle the huge challenges that the world now faces. And I would urge that from those who are tuning in online, as well as you here in the room, that try and draw up from some of that lived experience about how education has worked for you. So we will do the traditional thing, but quick fire, of getting some initial thoughts. One thing that particularly jumps to mind on this question across our panel. I'm just going to go in this direction in a second, and then I'm going to launch us into discussion, because we have loads of views and ideas on this panel, and we have them here in this audience, and I presume we can get them from people who are online as well. So those who are watching, save them up. What is the best way for them to participate? It's through the chat box. So put your thoughts in there and we will come around to those. Okay. So let's kick us off. Alec, I'm going to pick on you first. One thing that jumps to mind when it comes to how we should be teaching and engaging with future leaders.
Can anyone hear me? Okay, that's good. This mic's working. I think the first thing I wrote down was that we need to train people to be risk takers, or rather not fall into the idea of some sort of going with the status quo or some form of complacency. Because this is what I've personally experienced from working with some people around my age, is that sure, they might have grand ambitions, much younger, but, the further, you go up in life, the more, they get well down, and then we tend to become a lot more complacent, and, we sort of accept the status quo as it is, become less imaginative when it comes to, sort of expecting what we're able to do and inspiring other people to do. Yeah, I guess also it's just being able to speak out against this sort of like status quo idea and be able to put your first foot forward, as it were, to take the risk, to push the initial idea, push the ball downhill in the idea of change.
Thank you. So imagine that you are going to an environment conference in London and you get on the tube and then you go into the conference hall. My bet would be that the people that you sit on the tube with are not going to be anywhere near represented by the people in the environment hall. And the reason is that environment and sustainability is still very white, still very middle class. I'm of mixed race. I grew up in a council estate in Essex. I'm not the normal sort of person, and most people aren't. So unless we start reflecting the modern communities of the UK in all their fantastic diversity and the modern global communities, we are not going to succeed because we are disengaging lots and lots of people on the way at the moment.
Very good. Thank you. Amy, over to you.
Thank you. I think one of the things we need to think about is the fact that leaders, future leaders, are everywhere. They are politicians, they are business people, they are managers, they're community leaders, and inherently that means it's interdisciplinary. So when we're thinking about how do we train these future leaders, for me, it's really about looking at what education are they getting? Is it interdisciplinary? Climate change is interdisciplinary, so we need to take that into effect.
I think for me, it boils down to the individual, and that comes at any age. I think one of my most significant moments of inspiration was when I was working as Eco Schools coordinator for a primary school, and I'm working in a community that's quite deprived. And one of the mums that obviously haven't got a lot of benefits, advantages, or life privileges, was so delighted to share with me that her little boy had encouraged her in the supermarket to buy some salad because he was able to try some salad for real from the school garden. And that moment of inspiration, the sense of wonderment, if we can capture that back into our education system and actually create the possibility of hope, knowledge of self, and a sense of authenticity, I believe we will actually inspire leaders of all ages, but we need to start with the little people because they are most receptive and they are most deserving. So we need to start young.
Thanks, Belinda. So for me, I think education is, of course, about inculcating analytical skills and communication and so many skills that you sort of look in any company's job description. But for me, I personally feel that education should also strive to inculcate empathy in people. Empathy should not be implied. It's not something that we take for granted. Oh, I am a human being, I feel, hence I'm empathetic. It's never like that. And I think the challenge that the world faces today is that when global leaders across the world, they sit at a round table discussing the fate of the planet, they lack empathy because they are never able to come to a consensus that, what is it that we can do today to use our privilege of education to do something good for the humanity. It's like an Indian leader would be there trying to put forward the agenda for the Indian nation. Somebody from the UK would be talking about what they can do to, make UK do better in the future. But nobody, literally nobody, thinks about what is it that we can do to make the humanity better. And I think education is a privilege that I have had access to, but there's so many billions of children out there, who have not had this access. So I think education should also give us the sense of responsibility as to how we can use it in creative ways to come with solutions. And I think the root quality would be empathy in that.
Blimey. Okay, as an educator, I think much of our educational system is not fit for purpose. It's not been designed to empower future generations, to equip future leaders for the sustainability challenges that we face. My job as an academic is not produce mini-me's. Very few of my students go on to become academics, and the education that we provide them, in some instances, I just think it's rubbish. To be brutally honest with you, we don't teach them the important things. We don't teach them about systems. We don't teach them modes of connectivity and empathy. In many instances, we teach the same things because they're the things we've taught, and these things are no longer really what we need in the future, even now.
Brilliant. Thanks all. We've had an extraordinary scattergunning there of some of the main issues, I think, and a lot of them connect the need for empathetic leadership related strongly, as you were saying, to representation, the need to make sure that we're being disruptive in how we think about education. That was very rapid fire in a stark break with the tradition of initial thoughts on a panel. I'm going to stay with some of the traditional elements, though, by abusing my position as chair and asking a first question to the panel, but to you all as well. We want this to be a discussion. So come in with your thoughts. You're at university, you're at school, you're engaging in further education. Imagine this, right? And you see the latest profit information on the oil and gas giants, vast profits being made, and you conceive of the huge lobbying power that they have and the power in politics and policy making. It can feel very difficult to be there learning at that scale about this problem, to then conceive of the full scale of how it needs to be acted on, the huge power imbalances that are inherent in this sustainability challenge. What are our thoughts here, and for you in the audience, on the role of education in ensuring that people feel empowered to recognize, to name those power imbalances, and then to take action that would have a chance of working collectively to be able to shift them? So a small bounded question to us all to begin with, but any thoughts on that from across our panel? I didn't want to go for that, and from our audience as well. How could we, Amy, if we, James, pass it down.
Thank you. So my initial thought on this is that it's about breaking it down. I think it is very, very easy to, as a student, look at the really big picture and sort of go, oh my goodness, where are we even going to begin with the climate crisis, with the imbalances of power? It can feel very overwhelming. And I think the problem with that is that it can sort of stunt you into going, oh my goodness, I can't, I'm an individual, I can't do anything. So I think education's role in this is to help students recognize what those systems are, so that when they graduate and when they go into work, they are looking at it in a different way and almost automatically looking for places within those systems where they can make a change and bring other graduates along with them. And hopefully enough people will do it to create a positive tipping point. That's the plan. But I think it's about recognizing those systems that you're entering into.
Very good. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to you. And do you mind if I also get you to do an intro to IEMA for those who don't know it in the audience as well, please?
Of course, yes, thank you. IEMA, yes. So what's IEMA? Yes. Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. So we are the Professional Institute for Sustainability Managers and anyone who's interested in sustainability and the environment. We have 20,000 members in more than 115 countries, and we work with corporate partners as well to train and develop. So we do member support on a professional journey. We do a lot of policy work, the kind of changes our members want to see at national and international level. And we're also accredit lots of courses around the world, in fact. So I'm going to challenge your implied definition of education, which is the implication was graduate and postgraduate. Let's think about our electric car. So if we buy our electric car and we drive it somewhere, usually at the moment, it's very difficult to find a charging point. And the reason is that we need 20,000 electricians to meet the government's own targets for putting in electric vehicle charging points. We don't have 20,000 electricians. We certainly don't have 20,000 who are learning how to develop and train in renewable technologies. If you have an accident, then the first responders have to have a different protocol when you have a crash between an electric vehicle and a diesel vehicle. And that protocol is, in some cases, and I know this from anecdotal evidence, that protocol isn't there for some fire brigade. So that's something. If you have to go to hospital, there will be a different protocol. And also there will be a different protocol for the people managing that hospital in terms of climate change and how hot or cold hospitals can be. So education, when we say education, what we mean is everybody needs to have a protocol or training and skills and development, not just the elites. And again, this is another way we are taking people out of the conversation rather than putting people in. So I would say the scale of the challenge is enormous, but that's partly because we don't have everybody with us on the journey, because we've made it quite an elite, quite a difficult, quite a kind of monkish aspiration with lots of different words and acronyms and square brackets and COPs and UNFCCCs. We need to make it much more accessible for everybody.
So let's run with this point and merge it with this wider point about power. As we sort of cascade across all parts of societies, the capacities that are needed to ultimately avoid some of the worst climate and ecological scenarios, how can we ensure that those capacities run into some of the day-to-day ways society is running, all the way through, though, to the ability for people across society to challenge that entrenched power, which is behind a lot of this stuff? We've got any thoughts on the panel on that? Anyone in the audience, and any thoughts online? James, we'll throw over to you.
Well, I've got thoughts about power imbalance in education. Universities or places of education are very important in regards to, you know, generating the thought leadership, regards to the sustainable transition. But don't misunderestimate how they can also serve to be useful idiots for the continuation of profoundly unsustainable and unjust practices. So one of the things I'm becoming increasingly concerned about is a lot of the kind of myth making around net zero and the promises that future technological solutions or even nature-based solutions are going to save us from dangerous climate change, whether that's 1.5 or 2 degrees. And I think that education sometimes serves a rather negative force in these kind of discussions. And it's a relationship with got important power balances. So this university accepts a significant amount of money from fossil fuel energy majors who have committed and who are committing tens of billions of dollars to the extraction of new oil and gas, but are using relationships with universities to produce social license to allow them to continue on that, because they can say, oh, yes, we are extracting more oil and gas that will take us beyond 1.5. But at the same time, we're doing some nice little projects in the Amazon to work out how you can reduce, you know, carbon. So it's okay, don't worry about it. And we facilitate that, and it's wrong. And I think more people need to say it's clearly wrong. That might not be a majority position, but it's something that perhaps we might be able to discuss later. I just thought I'd throw that one in there right now.
Well, what is the role then of what's a good model of education? I'll put this out to everyone, where we are able to recognize those dynamics that you're describing, those tensions, the potential for an here. Let's get that. So if you just lob that mic over there, and we're going to get a comment here, a thought from the audience. Over to you.
Oh my goodness, sorry. So I think we should enable more people to have access to critical education, where we learn to think critically, which of course we always do that in first year at university. But when I think back to my high school and GCSE, we didn't necessarily learn in such way. We just had the textbook. We had to learn what's in the textbook. Of course, Ministry of Education updates the textbook, but then the question arising is who has the agency over those textbooks? Who's in the Ministry of Education? So we should have more perhaps freedom, and teachers perhaps should have more freedom to basically base this education on research and educate people about different views, and enable people to make their own decision based on this education. And through this, well, within this country, we live in a democracy. So with this sort of critical thinking skills, if everybody had them, we could choose our leaders more wisely and not just listen to media, but because with critical thinking skills, we would be able to recognize basically, how to say it, we would have the power to go on Google, lovely tool, to basically recognize what's truth, to make our own truth, and to vote for the leaders that we think are the most suitable in this case. So in this case, we could also challenge that power relation within who the leaders are and how we choose them. Sorry.
Very good. So can I get some reflections from the panel on that thought then? Do we think that critical, we're gonna play this out a bit with Mike being thrown around all over the place. So Brenda, over to you. On this thought, critical thinking, then Alec, we'll come to you.
I think critical thinking is obviously, again, a sort of semi-elitist position to take, because I think as much as the evaluation system is flawed in terms of measuring the suitability or the capabilities of schools, and I think a lot of schools would be either accredited as great, good, or in measures, that's maybe not very well assessed, but that is a sort of a system that sort of standardizes a certain level of aptitude based on certain merits. It doesn't mean that those merits or classifications are correct or indeed encapsulating what needs to happen. But that's seen with regards to the SDGs and a global education platform. That means that there's a baseline of literacy that can be measured globally. Some metrics need to exist to be able to measure that level of competency. And then we're in a privileged life and establishment where we can actually access various different types of learning, where for a lot of people there is not even an opportunity to access learning because, for one, there's not a resource that they can use to do that, and two, it would be a real luxury for them to think, I'm not being taught in the way that I'd like it to be, because it needs to be more critical thinking based. As much of the value that there is in critical thinking, it's still a very privileged position. And I think access to information versus education, there's a slight difference there in the debate, because people that haven't got the baseline will not be in a position to be empowered to actually represent themselves, and that disparity is still quite big.
Hang on, let's do Alex first.
Yeah.
Sure.
I guess reflecting a little bit on Belinda's point, I think she touched a bit, but I think whether we talk about this idea of, wanting an idea of media literacy or like wider critical thinking, it comes down, I think one of the key problems we have is that we don't have enough funding and enough education as it is. I mean, regardless how much value we put on it, the amount of funding, I mean, definitely we've seen at primary and secondary school level has gone down. I mean, and especially, even once we expand beyond the UK, it's horrendous how much, the lack of funds, lack of resources they have to, be able to put these things in place. So I do think it is definitely important. We have, ideas of media literacy, critical thinking, which are fundamental, I think, in, being able to understand climate change and obviously the fights for sustainability and so on. But I think we have to start the funding first. I think it's sort of putting the cart before the horse in a sense where, it's cool to have these ideas, but the funding's not there. We're sort of running a stopgap where, teachers not being paid, certain courses not running. And, the priorities right now are not really there to make it so, because, the powers that be don't really want to fund education. It's rather funding ignorance.
Very good. Nice sound, but Sarah, over to you.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think critical thinking is really, really important. And it's, I mean, we could spool right back and say, well, do you actually get taught stuff in school that you need? I mean, how many people are taught how to balance a checkbook or work out how to run a small business? We have 500,000 small business owners in this country. Who gets taught the basics of running a small business? Who gets taught to think critically? And why is it so important? Absolutely to your point, because now if you scroll through on your Twitter feed, a Nobel Prize winner and someone who's just seen a cat die in the garden and thinks it's got bird flu have an equivalence. Everybody's the same now, and we all lack the critical skills, I think, to be able to weight those opinions accordingly in a fantastically complex world with fantastically complex challenges for us. So now you get my vote, definitely.
If you hold on to that, please.
Thank you. I agree that critical thinking is important, but then I just want to take a step back from critical thinking. And I think the main importance of education, so I'm coming from a developing country and I'll give you that perspective. I think the people of my country need to be educated because at least they will know what rights they have in the Constitution. People do not even know what they're entitled to. And I think when people are aware of their rights, that is when they have a voice in choosing who the government should be and who should lead the government. I think critical thinking honestly has got nothing to do with it. The first step of the education, and this is universal education, everybody should be able to at least read and write in any language, right? And when you're able to read and write in any language, that's when you're able to read the fine print. And that is when you can avoid being scammed. And that's where, you can dream of a world where people are, they will be taken out of poverty, because education for the sake of critical thinking does not even lie on the agenda of people who are struggling to meet the basic necessities of their life. They just want to be able to live a good life. And for them, education is a means to have a decent job that will give them a decent wage. They wouldn't have to, sort of struggle doing menial labor. So yeah, critical thinking is not really on the radar. Yes, it's very important, but I think critical thinking has this elitist concept. You have to go to a university. How many of us can even afford that university education? I had a huge loan, which I paid like a week back, and I could finally sleep peacefully at night. That's the kind of dent that university education causes on your bank account. I am privileged. I could afford that bank loan. Not many people can do that. So just because a person does not go to a university, does not have that degree, and hypothetically speaking, does not have the critical ability, does not mean that they're not capable enough. It's just that they haven't had that kind of exposure in life.
And can I am on this. Okay, this is amazing. So Joe, if I invite you to stay with the mic, you're talking there about having that fundamental information that people need to operate in life, to know their rights and so on. What would you say to those? And I have come across people who say this, that within that frame, information and learning about the climate and ecological crisis is still not a priority. There are people around the world who are in a situation where they're unable to, But how do you think that those could be reconciled? Because it is, of course, no surprise to anyone in this room that is a huge priority, but how do you think in the context of that education they can be reconciled?
So again, coming from a very limited knowledge that I have, I'm not an expert or anything, but when I look at the inequalities that already exist in society, like I said, people are struggling to meet the basics of life. And then when you add climate change into this equation where people are not able to survive on day-to-day life, to be honest, it's really not, they do not give a shit about it. If I have to be like really blatant, they do not, because they don't even know whether they will have the meal to survive the next day. And when you tell them that, oh, don't use fossil fuels, how are they going to burn the gas in their house? How are they going to light the stove and cook the food that they need to survive? It's very easy, for us to sit here and debate the future of education and things like that. But I think we are what, like 10%? My statistics might be wrong, but we're like 10% of the elite in the world. The 90% does not get to be here, right? So if we have to bring climate education into this picture, I think the basics have to be sorted first. I am not going to go to a poor person and tell them that, oh, switch to solar panels. Please stop using kerosene. It's harmful for the environment. That person has all the right to tell me to go fuck off because, come on, I have the privilege. They don't. So yeah, I don't think you can do that. You have to first coming back to your question, you have to get the basics sorted.
Right.
So it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When I have my basic necessities of life sorted, that's when I can think of self-actualization and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Let's run on this strand a little bit more. Sarah, bring you in, but just let me put something into the way we're thinking here. There are, of course, have been for decades, hundreds of years, movements in the global south that have done a very good job of managing that intersection, of ensuring that an understanding of the integrity of the local natural environment is very important to have those life's basics. This is not me in any way contesting what you were saying there, but how is it that we can make sure we have that balance, that we don't see education as a privileged, Western, largely information deficit model where those who are enlightened through universities get a privileged position in making change in the world, and one that actually is about, at the end of the day, the needs and requirements of people in local places, local environments, and particularly those who have the least in the world. So Sarah, over to you, and then we'll go into the audience as well.
Yeah, just very quickly, to build on that point, it is disadvantaged communities wherever you are in the world, I think. So I'll give an example of flying. So there's a lot of old Etonians in fishermen sweaters who are wagging their finger on the telly. Don't fly, don't eat meat, don't do this, don't do that. A friend of mine who is the first person of his family to have been born in this country, everybody else was born in India. So all his family are in India. He said, well, what am I saving the planet for if I can't go and see my family? And I'm constantly being told I can't fly and it's evil to fly. And he said, well, I don't want a part of that society, thank you. I've got friends with Caribbean heritage who've said exactly the same thing. You're telling me I can't go and see uncle whatever for his birthday, not interested. I'm now completely disengaged from this. So reframing that prison to say, there are, I mean, I can take your point about, we can all be useful idiots, but there is a potential for sustainable jobs with meaningful futures and proper skills and training for people who aren't part of the elite, who aren't part of the, in the square brackets, out the square brackets, TCFD, Wonkatariat, who just glides through international meetings, meeting each other. There is a solution, and genuine solution, which means, and it does mean a levelling up. Inequality is a very large part of this picture, and so reducing inequality means you also make it much easier for people to understand why we're doing this.
Can we just get the person who wants to maybe we'll come back to you. We now have a roving mic. Yes. So can we just go over to the person just at the
Sorry,
front
you've
here?
been waiting very patiently.
I'll see back to you after we've had this one.
On the topic of education not being unequal, of like eliminating the inequality, I do see like a number of institutions trying to build open source education, your certain UN agencies trying to build resources for certain local communities, but oftentimes a lot of these resources, they don't credit into anything. Sure, you can learn from it, as like someone from any part of the world could potentially learn the skills that they might need, no cost, useful resources, but then that never gets accredited. There's no effort, I think I see, from any of these institutional providers trying to make it something that could qualify as something they could bring to their workplace, higher education, whatever, wherever they might use that for, which could help with leveling the inequality, but I don't think anyone has looked at that. And I don't know if anyone on the panel has something to say, but I think that's a place where you could probably close that inequality gap, because the resources are there, the materials are being made, a lot of money goes into that, but then sure, they learn that, but then do they get anything out of it? Absolutely not. It's for their personal leisure or personal knowledge, like building, but then they can't apply it anywhere. So for what?
Thank you very much. Amy, let's go to you and then we'll, James, I think you've been nominated.
Yeah, thanks. I actually, what I was going to say relates a little bit to what you were saying, Hilary, and what we were talking about before. So I think when we're talking about, people who don't have an education, I think we really need to think about what that word education means, and bringing in some of my own personal experience from growing up in Kenya and working with a lot of the local communities out there. They have an education about climate change. They just don't call it education, right? It is they see the land changing, they know it's happening, and they are very worried about it because it is their livelihood. So I think that's an important thing to talk about. And Hilary, to your point, and from my experience, I see a lot, like there's so many NGOs who go in and, it's like, we're going to change it. It's going to be great. And there are a lot of examples about why that just doesn't work. I think there are probably some more like innovative ones coming in that I've seen. But I think we have to question where that's coming from. And is it just a tick box for a lot of people saying that they're doing some stuff in the global south?
Yeah, I've got other thoughts. I'm trying not to get myself into trouble. So right. MIT courseware, edX, these really, like the AAA platforms that started in the United States, but other countries are catching up with MOOCs. So we have MOOCs, massive online courses from University of Exeter on climate change, and they're amazing. And you'll get a certificate which is pointless, right? It doesn't mean anything because anyone can get the certificate. So why wouldn't they give us a credential? Well, they're not going to give you a credential because you're not going to pay for it. And the reason is because they want you to buy their product, which is the degree program. And I speak from experience because I'm developing one myself for this university. And my initial ideas of decarbonizing internationalization by allowing much more engagement with non-OECD, low, middle income nations, a pretty low entry cost, but potentially large numbers of students. So that's just not the business model they're interested in, right? They're interested in the executive education market, the part-time market, because they're going to charge you more than it costs to come and do the program on campus, right? And that's the kind of world that they're in. And when you try to penetrate that world, well, yeah, but what about the notion of the responsibility that we have to give this to wider society, due to humanity, if you like, then the only kind of traction you're going to get is if you can think that's going to increase their kind of advertising or marketing kind of campaign or something. I mean, I'm not suggesting at all that they're, you know, sociopaths or something, but the value system is one. I'm not suggesting that. I have not suggested that. The value system is one which it is hard to penetrate unless you speak the numbers of basically dollars.
So let's riff on this point then. Have we here at Master Day and online come across initiatives that are trying to smash through or rip beyond the constraints being applied to education by profit-driven models? What kind of initiatives might we have seen, ways of spreading information or ways of thinking to wider audiences in direct contradiction of the increased monetization of education? Any thoughts? We've got one here, then one at the front here. If we can send that. We've got the roving mic. We've got the roving mic. We're good now. We're good now.
Hello, sorry. It might not necessarily be a way of spreading information per se, but I think what we always think living in this country is that education has to be paid for, especially higher education. Yet I come from a country where if I went to do bachelor's there, I would have not paid anything. It would have been paid 100% by the state, by taxpayers. And that's actually a standard across the majority of Europe, and which is spreading education, and we don't have to really pay for it. And it's still quite good quality education. For example, University of Helsinki is in 100 in the world for the best universities. Yes, it's not Oxford, for example, but it's still within the 100. So it's extremely privileged. Yet people going there and acquiring that knowledge, and the university being a way of spreading this knowledge, is completely for free. You can enroll if you would like to. Yes, there is quite a competition, but I would say I'm not the best student ever, and I somehow got in there later. Long story. Anyways, but it's for free.
Yeah.
So that's perhaps one of the means of spreading information. In this country, we just tend to think of it as for profit, but it doesn't have to be.
Which didn't used to be the case, sadly. And then right here at the front.
You hit on a really important point, which is that we've changed as a society. And one of the things that hasn't sort of come into this is the need for really societal change, it's not just money. If you came to Britain just after the war, when people were having to basically rebuild a country, education was free. University was free. You had the 1960s and the opening up of the universities and the big sort of what they called the white heat of, progress. There was a national feeling that it was for the national good. It was for the good of everybody. We don't have that feeling now. It's a feeling that I think has crept in the last probably 30 or 40 years of greed and profit. And wherever there's a hole in the market, you can fill. So the idea of doing something that's altruistic, such as your suggestion of providing something that's much cheaper but en masse, there's also a certain strata of society now that looks at education in a very different way, in the sense it suits them to have us ignorant.
Yeah.
And ignorance is something that's been encouraged by various societal changes. So that's just my view. And I think if you're talking about climate change, this is an emergency for every single human being on the planet.
Yeah. Thank you. And let me, so we've got more around the room. Put hands up, those who wanted to come in. Let's do an online question. I'm going to lob in another frustrating question, then we'll take the two that we have here in the room. So please, from our audience online, hello guys again, we've not forgotten you, I promise. How are we going to get our question from online? How are we going to hear that? Okay, great. Do you want to read it out? Oh, can we see? We get a mic so the rest of the online audience can. No, having a mic, and my mic's just falling down my top as well. So it's online, we are much more together than it looks like. Okay, we might.
Question from online. Surely allowing leadership potential to grow and develop is as important or more important than education. The world of international development has moved from top-down to participatory approaches, which help identify and grow local leadership, who will then educate themselves and their communities. Is this something that the climate change community is lagging behind on?
Yeah. So let's bear that in mind with our next thoughts. I would certainly agree. So I'm going to throw an additional thought in there, which is that we are heading up globally what will be a non-linear amount of change when it comes to the climate and ecological crisis. Things are already becoming more unstable, in some ways worse than we anticipated at this stage of warming. So the context globally and locally in which we will seek to deliver equitable decarbonisation and the restoration of nature will become increasingly unstable. That adds an additional dynamic level of context to what we will mean by leadership. To put it bluntly, how we lead at whatever scale, in whatever situation, will also have to handle the fact that we will see increasing distractions, chaotic distractions as a result of the climate and ecological crisis. That's a key challenge for leadership now, and there's hopefully a lot that education can do to that. So with bearing in mind that thought and the one online, let's get some more thoughts in. So we'll go in the middle here, and then we'll come over there. So if we go in the middle, thank you.
Thanks. I'm interested what the panel's perspective on, we've talked a lot about the kind of formal academic style education, but you touched earlier on the need for electricians, an example. So to what extent does the panel feel that perhaps the focus is on the wrong types of education, on society valuing academic style education over, say, technical education, and the importance that, you know, higher education isn't, obviously it's very important, but it's not, what we also need is scaled technical education. And if we live in a society that values that and values the people that do that, that could be as important as making, say, greater access to higher education available, if not more.
Very good. Let's take some thoughts on this. Alec, you had your hand up, and then we will come to the other thought in the audience.
I think, speak for everyone, where I think that's extremely important. I mean, you look at how our education is developed. I mean, GCSE to A-level is practically an example of how, you know, these sort of skills are lost completely. I mean, if you want to learn how to, you know, become an electrician, you may go to college to learn BTEC, but the stigma around, you know, going to college to learn, you know, learning a quote unquote lesser course, you know, puts lots of people off it, especially the skills which we need if we're going forward in transition. And especially, you know, the sort of, I guess, the sort of like emphasis we place on sort of university education being the pillar that it is. And that, you know, the idea that if you want to succeed in life, you have to go to university. You know, that's a full stop for a lot of households, you know, and especially a lot of people I've talked to, they come from families where, you know, university is the only option. You know, you can't do anything else. You know, your whole life is to, you know, progress until you get to university and get a well-paying job out of it. So I guess it's on that point, it's just trying to decouple the sort of stigmas around, you know, presenting other options, alternatives, you know, maybe that prioritize the jobs which, you know, maybe are not, you know, the most headlining or, you know, are the most quote unquote, you know, high end, but at the same time are still necessary.
Let's get some more thoughts on the panel. Yeah, Belinda, too.
Thanks, Alec. I think I've come to knowledge that there's obviously an identification of the skills required, and this is particularly to drive the sort of renewable energy sector, and is upskilling and equipping people adequately to be the workforce, to be the people that implement, as you said, the EV charging electricians, the sort of solar panel engineers, the sort of wind turbine installers. Where are these people? And then that information exists within each of those sectors. Research and a survey has been done to establish what is needed. The education sector has carried information of this. they repeatedly invest in a very fancy robotics equipment or illustrating their sort of digital innovation, but then find themselves without a skilled lecturer to deliver the course to project the opportunities that could enable those young people to learn. So the joined up thinking is again not there. There's a sort of lack of awareness of what's needed, facilitating that and then empowering those young people to be the leaders in their sector. And then I think when you evaluate sort of education, knowledge gaining and self-knowledge, if each person becomes their own point of leadership, they lead themselves from their individual value set, then every person becomes as impactful as the next. And if you align your value set to making choices for your world, and in doing so, you're inspiring others to follow suit, then leadership doesn't have to be from an educated, expensive platform. It just needs to come back to common sense and self-respect. If you respect yourself and you respect the privilege of your life or where you live or how it rolls out and how that in turn connects you to the earth resource, it shouldn't be difficult to inspire people. You just need to be true. And maybe our role as leaders would be to inspire people to find their point of truth and maybe try and find a way to pinpoint that to one point of survival. That's just a thought.
Very good. Very good.
The first week of the section.
Yeah, here. Let's so we've got two more here. Let's go at the top and then we will finally come down to you.
So yeah, I think the conversation's moved on a bit now, but just a response to, I guess, asking for examples of sort of online, freely available, accessible university materials. I know like Coursera is a really cool one in that I think there's a lot of university courses that actually are made available. I don't know how much happens in terms of credit, but Hank Green of SciShows just started a new initiative called Study Hall, which is using YouTube basically as the medium, and people can actually take classes on YouTube or do the material and then convert that to college credits. But I've just read that there is a bit of a cost involved in terms of actually converting the credits. But really interesting, I think, to see how people are kind of using these different platforms. Like, I guess YouTube would be a kind of social media to try and change the accessibility issues around education. Thanks.
We will, thank you very much for those examples. We'll go just down here.
I just wanted to agree with...
Slide it up in the top.
Yeah, just wanted to agree with a kind of a lot of what I've been hearing. I think there's something here that we're getting out about training of leaders being everything everywhere all at once. So kind of where do we find leaders? It's not just, you know, in Westminster, or it's not just in certain particular places. So kind of what does that mean for community leaders or religious leaders? You know, it's kind of, it needs to be in business, and, you know, it needs to be everywhere. And there are inbuilt resistances to people leading and making change in all of those places. But it kind of, I think, has to be everywhere because of the level of urgency and the kind of scale of change. So I think that means that we're probably going to need to see some really unlikely alliances to enable that kind of scale of change to happen. And I really agreed with the point about kind of leading ourselves here, because I think, you know, I've been hearing about people who are needing or wanting to learn about retrofitting houses, and they're saying, well, we can't scale up the training because we don't have the teacher, you know, we don't have the kind of educators to do that kind of education. And so there's something about how those of us who are involved in education teach ourselves and kind of try and keep ourselves moving forward so that we can learn, kind of, we're on a journey together, learning with others, but enabling, you know, people to go further than we can, but also to go, that we need to kind of go further ourselves too. Yeah, I really agree with some of those points we had earlier about not assuming, taking wider definitions of education. So kind of education is a valued social activity that everyone is doing all the time in families, in households, and, you know, there's so much learning going on all over the place. Actually, the kind of education that we do that results in credentials is a kind of tiny fraction of the kind of education that's going on. So it's just, I think it still has a place, but there's so much more education, there's so much more leadership going on in so many other places, and it's how we kind of really keep that wide breadth of focus, I think is really helpful. Yeah, amazing comments, thank you.
Very good, thank you. So we are nearly at time, so let's do some final thoughts from across our panel here. I think in particular it would be great to channel this point that has emerged across all of this, that we need to make sure that we are breaking through the old hierarchical ideas of what we might mean by leadership and what we might mean by education. But Alec, can I invite you to come up with some last thoughts?
I guess just to follow on from that, I think it's also important to remember that making resources available doesn't have to be online. It can be in real life too. And especially related to my own experience when I was volunteering down there, you might have heard that, I mean, a lot of these appeared, I think there might be one next to my knowledge, but a lot of these climate hubs or / response centres, which have, areas that usually have come about where areas have declared, there's a climate emergency. So throughout last year, I helped set the one up in Totnes. And like you said, how there's resources available to, to let community people in the community to learn about climate change. There's also resources available for people to know how to, install, boilers or retrofit or, to help with heating and all these sort of materials which are made available at community level. Because, usually this climate hub is open maybe once or twice a week and people from outside can just go in and just be, have a conversation about, what climate change means locally or get understanding on, what they can do to help, which I do think that is sort of, I guess, I don't want to say that's been lost, but especially in a wider context where we're making a lot of things available online. It's also, I think, important to recognize that there's a lot of resources community-wise as well that we can use and take advantage of, and especially in the case of these sort of climate emergency centres, which, they have access to tons of resources, and especially they're in a local context where I think a lot of the quote unquote solutions are going to need to take place.
Very good, thank you. So
thanks, and yeah, really good point of building on that. I think there is a role, and you're absolutely to your point. Education is not just formal education. There are many, many routes of education. We can all be educators in our own sphere, and there's a real opportunity there. I think with education comes agency. The more knowledge you have, the more agency you have. Most people feel they have no power in their lives. Wherever their communities, you can't pull any levers to make your life better. There's always somebody else in a remote place that makes that decision, and that for me, my own experience of coming from a very underprivileged area and going to an elite university. I went to Oxford and read law. It was completely changed my life. Education completely changes your life. And so that is why this is so important, because if you can educate and give people agency and knowledge, that is going to be the most powerful way of getting to something approaching not as bad a situation as we are at the moment. And on that happy thought.
Thanks, Amy, to you.
Thank you. Yeah, some good points to follow on. I think for me, it's really about tackling the societal idea that formal education equals success and success equals profit. And I think that's something we need to really, really try and focus on. And a lot of that, I think, actually does come down to businesses. We're still living in a society where if you don't have a degree, you may not get a graduate job. And, we've got problems with AI and things like that coming into that. And I think we need to be very aware of that. And I do think we need, there needs to be pressure on businesses to take people from all walks of life, no matter what their formal education looks like. And I think when you start getting enough businesses doing that, I think society will follow. People will realize that doors are open to them. So I think that's what I'll end my thoughts on.
Thank you.
Thank you for everyone contributing. It's been very interesting to hear different thoughts. For me, I think it's coming together is that sort of individual empowerment, or as you sort of rightfully say, if people feel that they have a sense of autonomy to make those changes, but if people also understand that they don't have to function in isolation, that there's lots of other people that could either support, collaborate, or join them in their plight, then I think that gives people a sense of momentum. And then once you've empowered that momentum, then all of a sudden change just happens because it's intuited from the people's sort of heartfelt desire. And maybe that's a sort of a channel that we could pursue. Maybe we could just see how we can work on that sort of individual empowerment through an education that comes through all different media. And particularly if we look back to maybe the people in the Sahel, for instance, could possibly gain greater knowledge of new agri-tech solutions that could help them to offset the climatic impacts that they're suffering. They can access that through their mobile phone, through pictures, even if they can't read. So maybe we can use all the different mediums that we have available and not just gain education for the actual fact of gaining an accreditation that will buy you privileges, but to actually find the solutions through sharing that knowledge and education so that it's accessible and actually solves something, and it's not just another piece of paper that you can wave.
Thank you.
Thanks, Belinda. So there's this Japanese philosopher, Dr. Daisaku Ikeda. He says something very interesting. He says that, for what purpose should one cultivate wisdom? And I'm equating education to wisdom here. I might be very off the mark, but still I'm equating education to wisdom here. So my question to myself has always been, for what purpose am I educating myself? Because that's like my beginning point. What purpose am I going to use this degree for? And if all of us sort of question our education that way, what is it that I'm going to do with my degree, with my education? Am I going to become a mad scientist and build nuclear weapons and destroy the humanity? Or am I going to come with solutions that can solve the pressing problems with the world? So then, this sort of gives you an alignment on how we can use our education in today's world. And I think for me, this has always been my starting point. And yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Cool. Don't become a mad scientist. Yeah, there's more than enough of us. What is education for, right? What's the point of your education? What is the value of your education? At the moment, I'm afraid the answer to those kind of questions are transparently transactional. The value of a university education is so many thousands of pounds over your career, right? And it's a system which is kind of, I wouldn't say it's been designed, but it's been emerged in order to throttle the kind of challenges that we could produce on what we know to be deeply destructive modes of being. If you wanted to stop younger generations from being disruptive, you would send them in through an education system which massively indebted them and made them worry about having to pay off their loan over the course of, if not decades, then the rest of their life. And it's not a loan, it's a form of taxation, actually. And it's an incredibly regressive tax because rich people can pay it off very quickly. What education should be is about a process of exploration and self-actualization and realization, allow you to begin to think about the question, why am I here? Who am I? What's the purpose and value of my life? And how could I make things better? How could I become a positive, member of a global society? And don't underestimate just how dangerous those kinds of questions are and how unreceptive wider society will be. There are young people across this country, across the world, who by asking those kind of questions and then putting their body on the line are ending up in prison. It's non-violent direct protest. You can call it what you like, but that's the swell as well, the groundswell of those kind of questions, those kind of actions, are people willing to think about dangerous ideas. And if education doesn't facilitate our ability for younger people or even older people, lifelong learning, to be able to think about dangerous ideas, then I do fear about our future.
Thanks, James. And I think that point there about asking dangerous questions and the capacity to know them, the capacity to act on them is a good message for us to take away here. Often in university settings, we think about, I think, education in a kind of information deficit model where if we get the right levels of information in people, the world will change. But of course, there are many other different ones. There's a salience deficit, telling the right stories. There's an organizing one, a power deficit of being able to actually shift change. We've heard about a technical deficit here, and then I think there is a sort of more inner resilience element as well. But across all of those, asking those dangerous questions is crucial. And I think tonight at 7 o'clock, for those in Exeter, there are a couple of people who did ask many of those dangerous questions, who have combined an attitude towards education and agency, who will be talking at the Phoenix tonight. Is that right? At
7 o'clock, I gather.
2 people from Just Stop Oil. So anyone who's able to make it, please come down there. Big round of applause and thanks to our panel, please, everyone. A big thank you to you all here in the room and particularly the people online. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see more GSI events soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Sorry. Yes, and the networking. Get your